Welcome to Two Guys and a Question. Most leaders are busy. Very few are intentional. Danny and Alan have a conversation that explores why vision, not activity, is the true difference maker in leadership, business growth, and long-term relevance. Vision doesn't have to be grand, but it must be personal, practical, and guiding.
I'm Alan Creedy.
I'm Danny Jefferson.
And Danny, we got a really strong response to a recent podcast that we did about the 10-call man. I did it with David Stork.
Right.
And I used the Proverbs 22:10 and assume, knowing the world the way you know, that they don't like the fact that I use scripture, but so be it. That's who I am. There's another scripture that I use.
What's that?
And I thought I'd share it with the group because I think it really has a lot to do. It's a little complicated, but let's talk about it. And I want you to explore it with me.
Okay.
Proverbs 29, Proverbs 29, verse 18. Where there is no vision, the people perish.
Right.
Now, that's a very important verse and a very important application in the business world. But we need to approach it from this perspective. I would measure that almost 98%, I'm exaggerating maybe a little, of business owners and maybe organizational leaders don't have a vision. Period. Don't have a vision. They come to work. They know the tasks they have to accomplish, that they're technicians in effect. But in terms of where do I want myself to be, where do I want my company to be in 5 years or 10 years, they don't think that way.
If you're a funeral director, you're listening, you meet with a family, they want the service on a certain day at a certain time. You're picturing in your mind how that might work while they're talking.
Yeah, that's part of your vision, yeah.
And you will decide, wait a minute, Thursday is PTA night or something at the school. Right. And there may be people that are going to be parked in places that we may need to use, something like that. That's vision.
That's anticipate. That's a skill
anticipatory vision.
That's a skill set that good funeral directors have, and that is anticipating. They think through, and visualizing is an important part of that. What I'm responding to here, what I'm sharing with you is that most people go through life, whether they're leaders or not, really not having a vision. All right, we're used to that, and we can get very comfortable with it. And what makes it important here, though, is that as life proceeds, and you and I talk about this fairly frequently, and we talked about it in just a recent podcast about funeral homes have lost relevance with their customers, is without a vision of where you want to be or who you want to be, then as these market changes, as these environmental changes, ambiance changes occur, you start to lose control over what is really going on here. I want to drill down a minute because when you talk about vision with people, what they almost always do is actually think they go on Google and say, give me a grand vision for my business. And Google comes up with some thing about being the best in the country or et cetera, et cetera.
That's generally fluff.
And then they think they've got the thing accomplished. Right. But having a true vision is so highly personal and so truly relevant to the leader as a person. So I love the best vision, the one I love the most, and I hate the fact that it's already taken because I would do it if I could, is the Ritz-Carlton vision. And how is that expressed? There are some things that they do, but they boil it all down to a behavior. And that is, we are ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen. That is a grand vision. And now from there, they make sure that they're moving towards that vision at all times. Another set, and I want to give some examples here. I have a friend. He's about 10 years older than I am. His name is Bob. His wife's name is Amy. These are real people. And Bob is an engineer. And in the early 1990s, he had the foresight, vision, if you will, to start a .com company. Now, in the world of .com companies, this is a microscopic company, but it is an extremely lucrative company, extremely lucrative. About 20 years ago exactly, Amy came down with a very rare blood disease. And in fact, she was only one of 5 people in the world diagnosed with this blood disease,
Wow.
and it was fatal.
Wow.
There was a group of us that met at church every Sunday night to pray for Amy. Amy is the first survivor. Amy's still living today.
Good.
She is the
good.
first survivor. So that's the good news. At the time, though, Bob would have been in his 60s. Amy would have been in her 60s, frankly. And we used to have breakfast once a month or so. And one day he said, Alan, how can I increase the value of my business? And he had a very successful business at that point, very successful. And an instant response. I said, Bob, that's easy. I said, you need to make yourself unnecessary. And, of course, he reared back and said, why is that? And I said, because anybody who would be interested in you is not going to want you to stay. They may say they will, but ultimately they don't. And what you need to do is build a business that can run without your presence, and that will increase your value. Now, I'm saying this is the story about vision for Bob. I'm not saying this is a story about vision for everybody. About 3 years later, after Amy was healed, and he called me up on a Saturday morning, and he said, hey, this is Bob. Guess where I am? And I said, I have no idea, Bob, where you are. He said, Amy and I bought a condo down in Florida. We're going to be down here for 6 months, and I just wanted to thank you for getting us here. And I said, I have no idea what I did. And he said, you remember you told me to become unnecessary? I said, yeah. He said, I'm unnecessary. And now we can stay down here 6 months out of the year. So my point in bringing up that story, Danny, is that was his vision. That became his vision, that he would become unnecessary. Not everybody would have that vision. Not everybody would want that vision. But the point is he had a vision that he could move towards. So when you talk about not having a vision and the people perishing, it's not that you have to have some highfalutin grand vision like the Ritz-Carlton. That's not the point. But you do have to have a sense of where you want to go. And that will help you make decisions. It will help you figure out what kind of people you should have on your staff. It should help you figure out how you want to respond to changing consumer attitudes, needs, or whatever it might be, because they change. And it doesn't matter about whether it's 2025, 2026, or 1956. They don't stay the same.
We're not talking about goals. Goals
No.
and visions are two separate things. But you can't lead without a vision. You can't lead without goals. But if you make sure you understand the difference, and maybe we'll talk about that on another podcast.
And Danny, I'll just leave our audience with this. You bought a funeral home when it was doing 61 calls and was failing, right?
It was going out of business.
Your economic circumstances drove you to have a vision.
Yes.
And part of that vision was probably, if you'd been forced to state it at the time, was we can't stay where we are. We
Right.
can't continue to do what we're doing because it is an economic disaster if we continue in this direction. So you changed. And part of that vision, and I bet I'd be willing to put a little bit of money that you didn't crystallize it and write it down and all the rest of that stuff. You said in your subconscious, what do I need to do to stop being where I am? That was your vision.
Yeah.
And so you began to move towards that. And as you began to move and build that to over 300 calls, you began to see, well, wait a minute. Now it's not, I can't stay where I am. It's where can I go?
Exactly.
In order for me to get where I'm going, what kind of people have I got to have on my staff? And what quality of service do I need to provide to the people of this community to continue to grow? Did you do that?
I did.
Yeah.
And it's hard for me. You're bragging on me, and I appreciate it. The vision sometimes is created by circumstance.
It's created by circumstance, and it's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up, because here's the circumstance. Tom Anderson was right. Funeral service over the last 30 years has continually, without abatement, lost relevance with customers. all right? No, they're not rejecting you. No, they don't think you're a bad person. I'm not talking about any of that. But when we talk about, and I chastised you for this recently, is that we're fixated on the disposition, and we've really forgotten what are the common elements. Why is it that Alan Creedy is optimistic? In fact, I think that the current generation, 30, 40, 50s, are people who are going to enjoy much greater success if they are willing to assimilate the skills that, frankly, you've been helping them develop, not training, skills. So think about it this way. In the 1870s, we began to transform and adopt new skill sets. 1870s, right after the Civil War. And what happened? We not only knew how to craft coffins, we also knew how to handle livery. Golly. Then in the 1870s and 1880s, what happened? We became chemists and surgeons.
Chemists before then.
And surgeons, chemists and surgeons. All right. Now, do you think today's skill sets are challenged? Those are some challenging skill sets if you were a woodworker and what do they call them? Mule skinner back then.
Look, everything that you hear on these podcasts, we do not script. I've said that one time before. One of the reasons we don't is you're hearing raw vision. You're hearing raw reality of two men that are trying to assist others in growing their skills, growing their vision, thus growing the profession.
You know what, Danny? One last comment. Maybe what we really do is you and I actually do have a clear vision of the future of funeral service. If you ask me, what kind of skills would I need to be successful in funeral service, or what do I need to do to be successful? I have opinions, but I also have knowledge. You have the same. And we're working diligently to convey that vision and help others develop that which they need to be successful in the future.
And you can do it.
And we can help.
Thank you for listening today. If this conversation challenged how you think about leadership and vision, be sure to tune in each week for another edition of the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube Podcasts, or any of your regular podcast channels. And remember, you can do it, and we can help.